Again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this April 30th edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, we've got on the hazards weather graphic a wind advisory for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline for tonight and tomorrow. Excuse me, for east-northeast winds gusting to 45 miles an hour. And again, that's along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Could be some areas of blowing snow in that could reduce visibilities temporarily, but mostly just for the gusty winds the advisory is out for. And then there's also a wind advisory out for the Alaska Range for tonight, and that's for south to southeast winds expected to increase 25 to 35 miles per hour with possible gusts up to 60 miles an hour. And again, that's out for tonight until about 7 a.m. Monday morning. And from there, going to satellite imagery, you can see clouds pushing northeastward from the Panhandle up and extend up across the eastern interior, pushing mostly to the north, but the whole band pushing on into western Canada and the Northwest Territories there, followed by a break behind that. It brought pretty sunny skies to northern Cook Inlet today, into Prince William Sound, and up into the interior. Some breaks over the Copper River Basin, especially back toward the lower and mid-Yukon River Valley areas up to the northwest interior to the western Brooks Range. And then the next front, actually low pressure now, pushing across the eastern Aleutians, pushing a front into Bristol Bay, bringing rain and gusty winds into Kodiak Island. And peak wind gusts 53 miles an hour at Cold Bay today with that system approaching the peninsula there. And then gusty gale force northwest winds behind that across the central Aleutians, Adak and Atka. And we've got rain pushing up, rain and snow actually, into the Pribilof Islands during the day today, and mostly into Bristol Bay area. And then mostly just clouds moving northward there over the eastern interior, but there were some showers and rain over the Panhandle today as well. Pushing that through again, you can see that band really breaking up as it crosses the southeast coast there. And the other frontal boundary will also be breaking up as it pushes inland and starts to push off to the east-northeast. But that'll spread clouds and then chance of precipitation across all of southern Alaska during the night tonight and through tomorrow. On the chart, there's that low center just north of Unalaska Island this afternoon, about 980 millibars there, with gusty winds and rain pushing from the Alaska Peninsula on up into Bristol Bay and over toward Kodiak Island, Kodiak State Airport, picking up about a third of an inch of rain by mid-afternoon today in the last 12 hours, from about 3 a.m. this morning to 3 p.m. this afternoon. And then there could have been a few rain and snow showers up over the upper Yukon Valley, possibly extending, or it was extending down with that trough into the Yukon, and then down to the North Gulf Coast, and generally cloudy with showers over the Panhandle as that trough weakens, kind of splits apart there as it moved into western Canada, spreading most of the showers into western Canada this afternoon. Otherwise, gusty northeast winds over the northern Bering Sea, and the Pribilofs became gale force northerlies there over the central Aleutians with that tighter gradient, and then diminish out to the west there under higher pressure over the far western Bering Sea, extending up into the Russian Far East. And we'll see for tonight, that front pushes northward and eastward there, bringing rain along the North Gulf Coast. Chance of rain and snow, or rain or snow showers over the inland areas of southern Alaska, maybe some light precipitation making it all the way into eastern Norton Sound and to the mid-Yukon River Valley, but that'll be quite light. And farther to the east, most of the precipitation will stay south of the Alaska Range, with looking for those winds to increase through the Alaska Range. Again, possible gusts to 60 miles an hour as that front swings up and tightens the gradient a little bit there. It'll stay quite windy over Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians, and winds will diminish over the central Aleutians, but it'll stay pretty brisk out of the northwest for the winds for the Fox Islands. And look for snow showers with northerly winds gusting 25 to 30 miles an hour over the Pribilof Islands. Otherwise, the northern interior stays dry out to the Arctic coast. Could be a few skiffs of snow along the central and eastern Arctic coast, but nothing very significant there. But those winds will continue to blow from the east-northeast for the eastern coast, again, up to about 45 miles an hour. And it looks like that'll probably diminish tomorrow in the afternoon, especially for the Arctic coast up there. Much lighter winds, dry conditions, maybe some clearing as well. Otherwise, it stays cloudy with a chance of rain or snow from the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta eastward across the Kuskokwim Valley, and that includes Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula, Mananuska-Susitna Valley into the Copper River Basin. Heaviest precipitation will be along the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, as well as Kodiak Island and then southern Kenai Peninsula and the western Prince William Sound, with lighter precipitation amounts spreading into the northern Panhandle and around Yakutat. Look for more showery conditions, but still breezy for the eastern Aleutians with that low center pulling into Bristol Bay. Higher pressure will make for a partly sunny day with light winds on Monday for Adak and Atka up to St. Lawrence Island. Also improving for the Pribilofs, probably staying mostly cloudy there. Next front pushes rain into the western Aleutians with, let's see, and then for Tuesday, that front kind of elongates eastward there. Doesn't really push very far north at all into the Bering Sea. Splits into two low centers there over the Aleutians, both at 993 millibars. So it looks pretty wet out that way. That'll spread more rain into the eastern Aleutians. Risk of scattered rain or snow showers for the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, dry for the Pribilofs and a break there, but increasing clouds in the afternoon. And a trough from that low center lifting northward to the Yukon Delta coast will produce some shower activity anywhere over southern Alaska. Less of a chance in the Copper River Basin, just isolated to widely scattered showers there, mainly over the mountainous terrain toward the east. It'll stay unsettled for the North Gulf Coast and cloudy, and a cold front will push some rain into the Panhandle with light winds associated with that. Look for some flurries on the central Arctic coast. A chance of snow showers there for the eastern Brooks Range area, actually extending west and southwest into the Yukon and Kobuk valleys, down into the eastern Seward Peninsula area, and the Selawik valleys could see a few snow showers around, then maybe some flurries and fog for St. Lawrence Island up through the Bering Strait. And for the lows tonight, 40 to 45 for the Panhandle, otherwise 30s everywhere else. Upper 30s Kodiak Island, mid-30s for Bristol Bay, and lower to mid-30s for South Central Alaska. Highs tomorrow, 50 to 55 for the southeast coast. Upper 40s for the Copper River Basin, mid to upper 40s South Central Alaska, 45 to 50 in the Kuskokwim Valley, and mid-40s for Bristol Bay, mid-40s also for Kodiak Island. And the lows for Tuesday morning, 25 to 30 for the Kuskokwim Valley, 30 to 35 Bristol Bay and South Central Alaska, including the Susitna Valley, 25 to 30 for the Copper River Basin, and upper 30s to lower 40s for the southeast coast, mid-30s for Kodiak. Highs on Tuesday, again, 50 to 55 for the southeast coast, warmest down south, mid-40s Copper River Basin, South Central Alaska, pushing 50 in the Susitna Valley, as well as the Mananuska Valley, and the inland areas of the Kenai Peninsula could see 50, 51 degrees, and lower 40s for Bristol Bay, upper 40s for Kodiak Island, McGrath and Nikolai, as well as Sleep Mute, looking at 51 for the high. Up to the north, lows upper 20s to lower 30s over the central interior, cooling into the 20s over the northern valleys. Brooks Range 10 to 15, North Slope 0 to 10, and around 20 out toward the Bering Strait. Highs Monday afternoon, mid to maybe upper 50s for the central and eastern interior, cooling into the 30s over the Brooks Range, and then teens and 20s for the North Slope and Arctic coast. Near 40 for Nome, but 25 for, or 31 for Shishmaref, 29 for Savunga. Lows 30 to 35 over the interior there for the next morning, Tuesday morning. and everyone above zero, well above zero, even for the North Slope and Arctic coast. Followed by highs, upper 40s to lower 50s in the central and eastern interior, 20s to mid 30s out toward the Bering Strait, and 20s for the Arctic coast. Lower 30s for the southwest coast tonight, as well as the Aleutians, upper 20s for the Pribilofs. Mid 30s for the Pribilofs on Monday in the southwest coast, and upper 30s to lower 40s, Alaska Peninsula to Shimia, followed by lows, 20s and 30s, and highs in the 40s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And flying weather for Monday morning. IFR, central eastern Arctic coast, and also over the eastern Brooks Range down into the upper Yukon Valley. And then VFR up along the Kuskokwim Valley and into the upper Tanana Valley eastward to the border and into the Copper River Basin. Some marginal VFR along and south of the western and northern Alaska Range. IFR, North Gulf Coast there into Prince William Sound, and some VFR over the southeast coast. IFR from the Bering Strait down across St. Lawrence Island and along the Yukon Delta coast, Nunivak Island, Pribilof, St. Matthew Island. Remainder of the Bering Sea and most of the Aleutians, marginal VFR. Bristol Bay, IFR, and marginal VFR spreading into Kodiak Island. And for the afternoon, that covers most of Kodiak Island, a little bit of IFR showing up as well. Areas of VFR over the southern part of the state, along with some scattered marginal VFR and isolated areas of IFR, a little more pronounced along the North Gulf Coast there into Yakutat, and then down southward off the coast of the Panhandle, but extending in over Lynn Canal Glacier Bay. And North Slope, Arctic coast, marginal VFR down into portions of the Brooks Range there. And it looks like some marginal VFR even into the Koyukuk Valley. IFR pushing into far western Aleutians. That narrow band advances eastward, not quite making it to Adak early in the morning Tuesday. Another IFR zone along the southwest coast, northern Seward Peninsula, North Slope, eastern Arctic coast, and along the southern slopes or into the northern valleys of the Koyukuk and upper Yukon. Central interior, pretty much VFR, some lower conditions along the Alaska Range, back to VFR in the Copper River Basin, down into the Susitna Valley and northern Cook Inlet. IFR along the coast of the Panhandle. And for the afternoon, not much change. IFR along the coast of the Panhandle and the northern areas there, and narrow band up along the North Gulf Coast. Becomes a little more extensive there in Prince William Sound, down across southern Kenai Peninsula, possibly covering Resurrection Bay and Seward. VFR, though, Cook Inlet and southward to Kodiak Island, as well as up into most of the Susitna Valley. And then north of the Alaska Range, VFR all the way up to the Brooks Range, then marginal VFR from there out to the Arctic coast. IFR, St. Lawrence Island into the Bering Strait to about Shishmaref, and then an elongated area of IFR across the southern Bering Sea, dropping southeastward across Adak Island and Nikolsky. And the Tuvik VFR for the day on Monday. Same forecast for Adigan, mostly marginal for both those passes in the Brooks Range, Lake Clark and Merrill. Marginal VFR, possible IFR in the eastern entrance of both passes. Rainy, marginal, same thing, possible IFR eastern entrance. And for windy, marginal VFR, lowest conditions southern entrance. And for Isabel, optimistically, a VFR day coming up for Monday, hopefully. Same thing for Mentasta, marginal VFR through that pass. And Tanita, their marginal VFR. And Portage looks pretty marginal as well. And for Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels, 2,000 feet there over Norton Sound, and also up over the eastern interior areas, and then 2,000 to 6,000 feet across the southeast coast. At the surface, just north of the Pribilofs, but well into the southwest interior, cutting across the northern Kenai Peninsula and the North Gulf Coast. Icing. Areas of isolated moderate rime icing possible in the shaded area there from Kodiak Island, northeast Bristol Bay, up across Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley, eastward across Prince William Sound, the North Gulf Coast, and into the northern Panhandle. Remainder of the state pretty much icing free, or free of any significant icing, and then another band pushing into the western Aleutians with the next frontal system. And the 33,000-foot wind flow chart, jet stream showing southwesterlies up to 90 knots coming into the eastern North Gulf Coast, west 70 over the western Aleutians. Southwesterlies 45 to 55 knots right up into southern Alaska, northwest 40 over the eastern Aleutians, and southwest 45 knots right across the Aleutian Range. And then 3,000 feet, 40 to 50 knot winds around that low just west of Cape Newenham, northwest 45 knots across the eastern Aleutians. Turbulence, considerable moderate turbulence there, southeast interior and Iliamna, Kodiak Island, as well as the western Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining us here today is Eric Stevens from the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, GINA for short. And Eric, you frequently come on the show to tell us about these really cool things that we're doing with satellites over Alaska and how we can use these really awesome tools. But I'm thinking all the while there has to be a mad scientist somewhere working on the next cool thing in the satellite laboratory. What is being developed today?
Right. Well, you know, when I was a kid growing up in the boonies in North Dakota there, on Sunday after church, the old people, like my parents and their parents, would gather and have coffee and talk. And I kind of eavesdropped on them a little bit. And the theme of a lot of these conversations seemed to be, well, isn't it amazing what they can do these days, someone would say.
Sure.
And I was thinking, oh, I don't know, I was too young.
Right.
Well, now I'm old enough in the weather satellite business.
You can remember when.
The new generation of weather satellites, I'm starting to say, isn't it amazing what they can do these days? Because it's always improving.
Yes.
Maybe an analogy here is like television. Television started in black and white, then it went to color. Analog signal transitioned to digital here a number of years ago. Standard definition becomes high definition.
Right.
Well, weather satellites are changing too. First weather satellites went up around 1960, not that long ago.
No.
It's comparatively young science. And every time a new series of satellite is launched, we learn from the past, so the mad scientists decide, well, we could make the next satellite even better in such and such a respect.
Yes.
And now the United States is on the verge of launching, or in progress of launching, a series of new geostationary satellites that are better than ever before.
Okay.
Let's take a look at some of the previews of what these new satellites can do.
Peek inside the lab here, okay.
Yeah, and so we'll peek in, and here are some mad scientists and mad technicians dressed in bunny suits. This is, believe it or not, this is the business end of a weather satellite under construction in a clean room. You don't want a speck of dust on the lens of a weather satellite's camera. So this is done in a clean environment. They are building a geostationary satellite there.
Oh, cool.
This new generation of satellites, if you had to answer the question, why are these better? Why do we care?
Okay.
You could answer it with 3 words: faster, better, more. The new generation of satellites are faster than the older ones. The images are sharper, they're better, and there's more spectral channels. We'll talk about that.
Any one of these called Steve Austin sounds faster, better, stronger.
Yeah. You know what, though? These things cost more than $6 million.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They're pricey, but they are an essential tool for the Weather Service to fulfill its mission of protecting lives and property.
Exactly.
You got to have the tool to do the job, and it helps all of us when we get the accurate forecast, the warning in time, and this is the tool. Faster. On left here, we see what the old generation of satellites could scan in 5 minutes. On the right, that's what you get in 5 minutes, the whole planet, or at least one side of it. So it's faster. That means you can take more images over a given amount of time and make smoother movie loops out of that. Because animating movie loops really helps you highlight a feature that maybe you can't see as well in a single image.
Absolutely does, yep.
Let's zoom into a small piece of real estate like Texas.
Sure.
And we can see here a satellite that has a 1-minute movie loop visible light. You can see thunderstorms boiling there.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, the rippling of the top of the thunderstorm. This is a fun movie loop. We're going to be able to see things like this more and more often because of the new satellites being generated. Some things are only evident in animation. So that's faster. Well, what's better? We're able to now have sharper imagery than before. The Japanese have a satellite that uses the same imager that is on the new generation of satellites that America is launching too. An imager, that's just a word for camera. It's the camera on a weather satellite. We have something called the Advanced Baseline Imager.
Sounds important.
ABI. It's important enough it has an acronym. Everything's an acronym. Well, an ABI-like instrument is here over the Western Pacific, and we can see this color image. This is what a human eye might see if you were riding on the satellite.
Okay.
But it's a little bit fuzzy. With new technology, you can post-process the image taken by the satellite to highlight and sharpen some of the features. So this image here of the Western Pacific then becomes this image. Thanks to the processing techniques, yes, this is the newest technology. So we've got a new satellite that can provide better data than ever before. And on the ground, we can process it better than before as well to really sharpen up the imagery and to give us a better view of the weather than ever before. So faster and better and more. What do we mean by more? Well, on the older generation of satellites, the imager, the camera, had 5 slices of the spectral pie, visible imagery, infrared imagery, something we can't see from the human eye. A lot of different slices of the pie. We're going from 5. The new imager has 16 slices. Each slice has its own relevance. Some are best for volcanic ash, for smoke, for dust, for telling the difference between smoke and dust, which can look similar under some infrared channels, but other ones bring out certain things. All of these 16 bands are important. In fact, some of the mad scientists, they didn't want 16, they wanted 24. There's always more you can do. But that'll be the next generation of satellites. So now we say, isn't it amazing what we can do these days? And you know what? It makes you think, well, what's the future going to be like too? It's so important to be able to know what's going on now in the weather. If you're going to forecast the future, you got to know where things are now. And satellites are the way to see that, especially in Alaska, where we don't have as many observations down on the ground. The satellites fill in the holes.
Yeah, really important stuff. And I love hearing about what we can see right now, but I love thinking about what is possible in the future. It's amazing stuff. And since you paid for it, it's a good time to learn about it. If you'd like, check out the website at www.goes-r.gov. And as I understand, it's a really easy website to use.
Oh yeah, a lot of good information about what these new satellites mean to Americans. And it's the Weather Service's mission to protect lives and property, and this is the tool how to do it.
Cool stuff, Eric. Thanks so much for sharing that with us today, and thank you for joining us right here in Alaska Weather Facts. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast for the south coast, the Panhandle tomorrow, Monday. North to northwest winds or west to northwest winds, 15 to 20 knots, and south to southeast winds, 20 to 30 knots for the north coast. Lynn Canal, southerlies at 15 knots, Stevens Passage, winds south at 10 knots with 2-foot seas, and Clarence Strait, northwest winds, 20 knots, seas 4 feet. And then for the outlook for Tuesday on the south coast, westerlies 20 knots, north coast east or west to southeast at about 15 knots, seas 10 feet. Lynn Canal, south winds 20 knots, southeast at 20 for Stevens Passage, north 20 for Clarence Strait with 4-foot seas on average for all of the inside waters. And for the Prince William Sound zone, small craft advisories on Monday for southeast winds, 30 knots, seas 7 feet. South to southeast winds at 30 for the eastern North Gulf Coast with 8 to 10-foot seas. Much lighter winds on the western North Gulf Coast, south at 15. And for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay, southeasterlies at 30 knots with 8-foot seas. Small craft advisories for southern Cook Inlet, wind southeast 25 and 10 knots from the south for northern Cook Inlet. And then on Tuesday, variable winds at 15 knots for Cook Inlet with 3-foot seas. South at 15 for Kamishak Bay. Wind southwest at 20 knots for the Barren Islands. And south to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots for the North Gulf Coast. Seas around 10 feet. And southeasterlies coming down to 20 knots for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, south to southeast, 30 knots. And for the Alaska Peninsula, west-southwest, 20 to 30 knots, with seas running 2 to 12 feet. Bristol Bay, southeast, 30 knots, 4-foot seas. And for Tuesday, Kodiak Island, southwesterlies at 20 knots with 5 to 11-foot seas. And for Bristol Bay, Southwest at 20, the Alaska Peninsula, west-southwest at 20, with seas running 6 to 9 feet, about 4 feet in Bristol Bay, and out to the eastern Aleutians and central Aleutians, northwest 30 knots, seas 10 to 13 feet, western Aleutians, southeast at 25 to 30 knots with 7 to 8 foot seas. Outlook for Tuesday. Western Aleutians from Shimei to Kiska, westerlies at 20 knots, seas 8 feet. Kamchatka Island, west-southwest 20 to 25 knots with 7 to 9 foot seas, 8 Akanatka, south to southwest winds 25 knots, seas 6 to 8 feet. And for the Fox Islands, south to southwest winds, mostly 25 knots with seas running 6 to 9 feet. And for the Pribilof Islands tomorrow, Monday, gale warnings, northwest winds 35 knots, seas 11 feet. St. Matthew Island, north winds at 30 knots with 5 foot seas. Northeast at 20 for Norton Sound, north 20 for St. Lawrence Island and the Yukon Delta coast. And for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, northeast winds 15 knots, seas at 2 feet. Then for Tuesday, Norton Sound, east winds 15 knots, and St. Lawrence Island, west winds at 15 knots. And for the southwest coast, winds mostly west at about 20 knots, seas running 2 to 4 feet. And the Pribilofs, west winds 20 knots, 6 foot seas, northwest at 20 for St. Matthew Island, with seas around 4 feet. Up along the central, or all of the Arctic coast, east winds 20 knots for Monday. And for the Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds 15 to 25 knots. And moving on to Tuesday, central and eastern Arctic coastal areas, east at 15, and for the west side there, northeast 15 to 20 knots, and from Cape Thompson to Wales, east winds 15 to 25 knots. For tonight, front moves northward, bringing some moisture, especially clouds and areas of precipitation in across much of southern Alaska, and eventually pushing into the extreme northern panhandle. Otherwise, it stays wet and windy from Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, all the way out to about Atka Island. And then for tomorrow, another front pushes rain into the western Aleutians. Low pressure now over Bristol Bay. Front weakens as it pushes northward, with a chance of showers or rain and snow across much of southern Alaska, mainly south of the Alaska Range, and just some flurries possible for Seward Peninsula area.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.